The heavy porcelain shattered against the pristine white marble floor, sending dark liquid splashing across the polished leather shoes of Julian Croft. He didn't even flinch. Instead, his hand reached out aggressively, ripping a faded, unmarked leather purse right out of the woman's grasp, hurling it brutally onto the ground. The contents exploded everywhere: a cheap lipstick, a ring of old keys, and a crumpled blue folder. "Take your cheap purse and leave." Julian's voice echoed like thunder through the five-star lobby of the Grand Horizon, dripping with absolute disgust as he stared down at the calm, elegant woman standing before him. "Look at you. Did you honestly think a black woman carrying a battered piece of trash like this belonged in a place of luxury? You are an eyesore to my elite guests. Look at the mud on your boots, honey. You look like you belong in a shelter, not a lounge." He sneered, stepping closer, intentionally grinding his heel into a small photograph that had slipped from her bag. "People like you come in here trying to blend in, but you smell like poverty from a mile away. You're nothing but a stain on this establishment, and frankly, you're ruining the appetite of everyone who actually has a right to be here. Get out before I have security throw you into the gutter where you belong." He had no idea. He had absolutely no clue that the very folder he just threw onto the wet floor contained a done deal, an $80 million purchase contract, and that this exact moment of arrogance would cost him his career, his reputation, and his entire future. Before we reveal how this thieving manager's worst nightmare unfolded, don't miss a single second of this incredible story. Drop a comment right now with your current location and local time so I know where you're watching from. And if you believe that human dignity should never be defined by a label, hit that subscribe button right now to join our community. Let's dive into the truth. 2 hours before those porcelain shards hit the floor and stained the white marble of Buckhead's most prestigious high-rise, Maya Montgomery sat in a quiet, sunlit office on the 24th floor of an elite downtown Chicago skyscraper. The massive mahogany desk in front of her was completely buried under a mountain of heavy legal documents, independent financial audits, structural inspection schedules, and zoning permits. 35 luxury boutique hotels and high-end commercial lounges across the state were now officially transition properties, all preparing to merge under the singular banner of Montgomery Holdings. The final wire transfer had been initiated exactly 72 hours ago. $80 million. It was undisputedly the largest, most ambitious commercial real estate acquisition of her entire professional career. Her executive assistant, a sharp young man named Marcus, knocked twice before pushing the heavy oak door open. Ms. Montgomery, the formal press conference with the city business journals, is officially set for Friday morning at 10 o'clock. The corporate marketing team needs to know if you would prefer the announcement to take place at our corporate headquarters or at the newly acquired flagship location, the Grand Horizon. Maya didn't answer immediately. She leaned back in her leather chair, her gaze fixed on the bustling city grid below. "Cancel all my afternoon appointments, Marcus," she said quietly. He blinked, visibly caught off guard. "Ma'am, you have a quarterly board review at 3. Maya pulled a worn canvas jacket off the back of her chair. It was slightly faded, completely devoid of any designer logos, and featured frayed stitching along the cuffs. "I'm going to Buckhead," she murmured, slipping it over her shoulders. "The Grand Horizon. I want to see the venue with my own eyes before anyone in that building knows my name or realizes that I officially own it." Marcus had worked for her long enough to recognize the deeper meaning behind this routine. Maya Montgomery never walked into newly acquired commercial properties wearing a tailored $5,000 suit while corporate cameras were rolling. She walked in looking like an ordinary person with an average income. Old leather boots, no diamond jewelry, no luxury watch, and a simple ball cap pulled low over her eyes. She intentionally chose to look like someone who had nothing, because how a staff treated a person who appeared to have no social leverage told her everything a corporate spreadsheet never could. "Should I notify the regional operations director that you are en route?" Marcus asked, reaching for his desk phone. "Absolutely not," Maya said, grabbing her keys. "That completely defeats the purpose." 20 minutes later, her dark sedan, not her executive Mercedes, but a 10-year-old Honda Civic she kept for private errands, pulled into the impeccably manicured parking lot of the Grand Horizon. From the exterior, the establishment was flawless. It featured an elegant limestone facade soaring 20-foot glass windows and sharp boxwood hedges. A gleaming brass sign by the entrance bore the name in clean serif letters. The establishment sat on a prime corner in Buckhead, a wealthy neighborhood where the average dinner check routinely ran north of $75, and the lunchtime crowd exclusively wore dry-cleaned designer shirts. Maya stepped out of the vehicle, adjusting the strap of her faded, unmarked leather purse. It was an old bag, the leather soft and heavily creased from years of use, a priceless piece of personal heritage left to her by her late grandmother. To Maya, it was a beautiful reminder of where she came from. To the untrained eye of a shallow materialist, however, it looked like ancient garbage. Maya paused at the main entrance. Looking through the tinted glass, she could see a half-empty dining room, rich afternoon light cutting through the massive windows in golden slats, and a young woman behind the grand counter, meticulously polishing an expensive espresso machine. Smooth jazz music, low and sophisticated, bled through the heavy glass doors. She pushed inside. The rich aroma hit her, first seared artisanal butter, fresh rosemary, and a subtle sweetness wafting from the bakery ovens. The floors were a dark, deep hardwood that had been recently waxed to a mirror shine. The chairs were heavy, custom-upholstered velvet, and the linens were thick Egyptian cotton. It was a beautiful, quiet place designed entirely for wealthy people to feel exclusive and secure. The young woman working behind the counter looked up from her task, her face instantly breaking into a warm, genuine smile. Her silver name tag read Hannah Brooks, and her gentle demeanor suggested she was a young intern, perhaps in her early 20s, who possessed a nervous, earnest energy. "Good afternoon, ma'am. Welcome to the Grand Horizon," Hannah said, her voice bright and welcoming. "Are you dining in with us today?" Maya offered a warm smile in return. "Just a hot cup of chamomile tea, please, if you have it available." Hannah smiled warmly. "We certainly do, ma'am. I can brew a fresh pot of our premium loose-leaf chamomile right away. That will be exactly $25. Maya opened her faded leather purse, pulling out a crisp, clean $50 bill and placing it flat onto the polished marble counter. Hannah reached out to take the bill, but before her fingers could even touch the paper, a manicured hand came crashing down directly over hers, pinning her hand to the counter. "I will handle this particular situation, Hannah." A cold, patronizing voice cut through the air from the back hallway. A man in his early 40s stepped forward wearing a pristine white designer shirt, a silk tie and a gold-plated name tag pinned at a precise angle. Julian Croft, general manager. He wore a rigid plastic smile that carried no real warmth, a corporate gait that looked ready to slam shut at any given second. He looked at Maya's faded canvas jacket, her dusty boots, and her unmarked bag. He looked at her the exact way a wealthy person looks at a disgusting piece of mud stuck to the bottom of their expensive shoe. Hannah immediately pulled her hand back, her posture turning tense. "She already ordered, Mr. Croft. Just a premium tea, and I said—" Julian interrupted, his voice dropping into a razor-sharp whisper. "I said I will handle it." Hannah went completely quiet, her eyes dropping to the floor. And just like that, the entire warmth of the room instantly vanished. The smooth jazz music kept playing in the background, but the air felt entirely different, tighter, heavier, as if an iron window had just slammed shut on them. Julian picked up the $50 bill, holding it between two fingers like a piece of hazardous waste. He turned it over with painful slowness, while Maya Montgomery, the actual owner of the building, stood silently on the other side of the counter, being stared at like a criminal who didn't belong on her own property. But she said nothing. She just watched, because this was the entire point of the jacket, the boots, and the old Honda. She was here to see the undeniable truth, and the ugly truth was about to introduce itself. Julian Croft held the $50 bill up directly against the bright overhead chandelier. He tilted it slowly to the left, then tilted it deliberately to the right, rubbing his thumb aggressively across the face of the bill, as if he were trying to scrape away fake ink. Maya stood perfectly still, watching his theatrical display, without uttering a single word. Her expression remained entirely unreadable under the brim of her cap. "Where exactly did you obtain this bill?" Julian asked, his voice dripping with condescension. Maya raised an eyebrow slightly. "Excuse me?" He flicked the bill hard with his middle finger, creating a sharp, snapping sound that drew the attention of a nearby table. "The bill. I asked where you got it. People like you don't usually walk around with crisp 50s. Maya kept her voice level, completely unbothered. "From a standard automated teller machine at a bank. The exact same place every citizen gets their currency." Julian didn't laugh. He didn't even crack a smile. Instead, he turned his head slightly toward Hannah without actually making eye contact with her. "Go to the back office drawer and bring me the UV counterfeit detection pen. Right now." Hannah froze, her hands tightening around the handle of the espresso machine. "Mr. Croft, it's just a $50 bill. The watermarks look perfectly real and it feels entirely standard." Julian's head snapped toward her, his jaw tightening into a hard ridge. "Did I explicitly ask for your amateur opinion, Hannah?" I snapped my fingers. "Get the pen, now." Terrified for her job, Hannah opened a lower velvet-lined drawer and handed him a small black light pen. Julian uncapped it with an aggressive click and dragged the purple light across the face of the bill in slow, agonizingly deliberate strokes. The light passed clean through the bill. There was no smudge, no glowing red flags, and no discrepancy. The money was absolutely real, and every single person within earshot already knew it. Julian stared at the pristine bill for a long, heavy beat, visibly irritated that he hadn't caught her in a crime. Then he tucked the pen back into his front shirt pocket and dropped the $50 bill onto the marble counter, as if it smelled putrid. "Can't be too careful around here these days," Julian muttered, crossing his arms and looking Maya up and down with blatant disgust. He stared at her faded canvas jacket, her dusty work boots, and the unmarked leather purse resting on her lap. "We've had severe security problems in this district before. Your type frequently comes in here, orders the cheapest item on the menu just to occupy space, and then causes absolute chaos for our elite patrons." Maya's gaze remained locked onto his eyes. "My type," she repeated softly. Julian sneered, leaning over the counter until he was just inches away from her face. "You heard me exactly. Look at yourself. Look at what you are wearing. This lounge is designed for the finest residents of Chicago, not for vagrants who want to sit in luxury air conditioning for free." At table 4, an affluent couple dressed in matching luxury linen outfits glanced over. The woman nudged her husband's arm, whispering something under her breath. The husband shook his head slightly, whispering back, "Don't get involved, darling. Just let the manager handle her," before returning to his expensive goat cheese salad. Maya kept her tone perfectly level, her breathing slow and measured. "I simply ordered a cup of chamomile tea. I paid with completely valid legal tender. I would like my correct change and my beverage, please." Julian leaned back against the cash register, a mockery of a smile returning to his face. "See, this is exactly what I am talking about. Attitude. You walk into a five-star establishment looking like that. He gestured vaguely at her simple clothes. And then you immediately want to get loud and aggressive with me. I have not raised my voice a single decibel since I walked through those doors, Maya responded calmly. Not yet, perhaps, Julian snapped. But I know exactly how this specific story goes. You people always find a way to make a scene. Behind the counter, the massive espresso machine hissed violently, sending a plume of white steam curling into the air before it dissipated into the high ceilings. Hannah stood completely motionless, her hands pressed flat against the stone counter. Her eyes locked onto a tiny scratch on the surface between the two individuals. She looked as though she were silently praying for the marble floor to crack open and swallow her whole. Just then, the glass entrance doors swung open, and an affluent white couple walked into the CNHA waiting area. They didn't have a reservation, which was a strict requirement for afternoon service at the Grand Horizon. Maya watched intently as Julian's demeanor instantly transformed. The sneer vanished, replaced by an obsequious, groveling grin. He practically sprinted around the counter to greet them. "Ah, Mr. and Mrs. Sterling. What an absolute honor to have you with us this afternoon," Julian gushed, bowing slightly. The man wearing a pristine Ralph Lauren polo shrugged. "We don't have a reservation, Julian. We were just hoping to grab a quick table by the window." Julian waved his hands dismissively. "For you, reservations are absolutely unnecessary. Right this way, please." He personally led them to the finest VIP table in the room, pulled out their velvet chairs, and snapped his fingers at a passing waiter. "Bring these beautiful people 2 glasses of our finest vintage Dom Perignon immediately. On the house, courtesy of management." Maya sat at the counter watching the entire display of blatant corporate bias unfold. The contrast was blinding. Julian finished groveling, turned around, and the moment his eyes fell back onto Maya, his face hardened back into pure malice. He walked back to the counter, his polished leather shoes clicking loudly against the marble floor, ready to finish what he had started. Julian Croft slid back behind the marble counter, his arms tightly crossed over his chest as he stared down at Maya. The fake warmth he had just displayed to the wealthy couple was entirely gone, replaced by a cold, unyielding hostility. He glanced at the cash register, punched in a few numbers with exaggerated force, and the drawer slammed open with a loud metallic clang. He reached inside, pulled out a few crumpled bills, and slid them across the marble counter toward Maya. Maya looked down at the money resting on the stone surface. The mathematical calculation was completely incorrect. She had handed him a $50 bill for a $25 order of chamomile tea. She should have received exactly $25 back in change. Instead, there was a single $10 bill and a $5 bill resting on the counter, a total of $15. "This change is short," Maya said, her voice remaining quiet and firm. Julian didn't even look at the cash. He simply shrugged his shoulders, his eyes scanning the dining room. "No, it isn't. The bill is perfectly correct." Maya placed her finger on the $15. "The menu clearly states the premium chamomile tea is $25. I gave you $50. You owe me $25. You only gave me $15. Julian let out a short, mocking laugh, leaning his weight onto his palms against the counter. "Well, perhaps you simply miscounted the bills. That tends to happen quite a lot with cash people." Maya's eyes narrowed slightly, though her face remained an oasis of calm. "Cash people?" she questioned softly. Julian's eyes flicked to the small line that was beginning to form behind Maya, a wealthy woman wearing a pure cashmere coat and a man in a tailored suit. Both of them were white, and both of them were watching the interaction with visible impatience. "Look, lady, you are severely holding up my paying guests," Julian hissed, his voice dropping into a harsh murmur. "Take the $15 and leave, or just leave it behind. I really do not care. But you need to move out of the way right now. Maya didn't move an inch. She didn't blink. I want my correct change, Julian. Something violently shifted in Julian's face. The remaining facade of managerial politeness completely evaporated. What replaced it was something much harder, colder, and distinctly ugly. It was the dangerous look of a man whose absolute authority was being questioned by someone he deemed entirely inferior to him. Are you openly calling me a thief in my own establishment? Julian demanded, his voice rising just enough to carry across the quiet lounge. Maya looked directly into his eyes. I am simply stating that your mathematics are incorrect. Thievery is your word, not mine. Julian stepped out from behind the counter, completely invading Maya's personal space. He moved so close that Maya could smell the expensive espresso on his breath and the cheap, overpowering designer aftershave sprayed on his neck. He lowered his voice, but it was still loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear every single word. Let me make something entirely clear to you, honey. Ga sneered, pointing a finger directly at her chest, without actually making physical contact. You came into my restaurant. You are incredibly lucky that I am even allowing my staff to serve you at all. Plenty of high-end establishments in this specific neighborhood would have had you forcibly removed the exact second you crossed the threshold, looking like an absolute bum. He tapped his gold name tag aggressively. So I suggest you take your $15, take whatever dignity you have left, and get out of my sight. The entire room had gone completely, utterly silent. The smooth jazz track had faded out, and the automated sound system hadn't transitioned to the next song yet. For several long, agonizing seconds, the only audible sound in the entire five-star lounge was the faint hum of the refrigeration units and the distant clatter of silverware coming from the kitchen doors. Hannah Brooks broke the silence first. Her voice came out incredibly small, shaking, with a mixture of intense fear and moral outrage. Mr. Croft, she's completely right. The change is short. The register shows the tea was 25. I can easily open the drawer and correct the cash balance for her. Julian spun around on his heel, his face contorting into pure rage as he glinted at the young intern. One more word out of your mouth, Hannah. Write one more syllable, and I will personally write you up for insubordination and fire you before your afternoon shift officially ends. Do you understand me? Hannah's mouth instantly snapped shut. Her eyes welled up with hot, thick tears. She took a panicked half-step back from the register, looking at Maya with an expression that conveyed absolute agony and silent apology. I'm so sorry. I want to help, but I desperately need this job to pay my tuition. Maya gave the young girl a fraction of a nod, an almost invisible movement of her head. It's okay. I understand. Julian turned back to face Maya, fully believing that the power in the room was now entirely on his side. He had the corporate title, he had the cash register, he had the wealthy patrons who refused to speak up, and he had the backing of the security staff. He raised his hand into the air, snapping his fingers loudly twice. Gavin, get over here immediately. From near the grand entrance, a broad-shouldered man in a black security uniform straightened his posture. Gavin's stone head of security. He had been leaning against the podium watching the entire escalation with the stiff, uncomfortable posture of a man who hated what he was witnessing but didn't know how to legally stop it. He walked over slowly, his heavy boots thudding against the marble. He positioned himself a few feet behind Maya's left shoulder, not overtly aggressive, but heavily present. A dark shadow with a corporate badge. Maya could feel his presence. She could feel the judging eyes of the entire room staring at her back. She could feel the heavy weight of every single racist and elitist assumption Julian Croft had made over the last 10 minutes regarding her jacket, her skin color, her boots, and her grandmother's old purse. Suddenly, Julian reached forward, grabbing the hot cup of chamomile tea that Hannah had just placed on the counter. With a malicious smirk, he deliberately shoved the saucer hard toward Maya. The hot, dark liquid sloshed violently over the rim of the porcelain cup, spilling all over the clean marble counter and pouring directly onto the fabric of Maya's faded leather purse. The liquid began to pool on the counter, dripping down the edges. "There is your tea, lady!" Julian smiled, that cold, gated smile spreading across his face. "Enjoy your wonderful visit." The hot liquid rapidly pooled on the polished stone, dripping over the edge and soaking deep into the creased brown leather of Maya's grandmother's purse. Maya did not flinch, nor did she cry out. She simply reached into her pocket, pulled out a handkerchief, and gently wiped the wet surface of the bag. But Julian was far from finished. He wanted an absolute spectacle to prove his authority. "Look at the absolute mess you've caused," Julian said, his voice dripping with theatrical exasperation. He looked over at the couple at table 4, then turned his gaze back to Maya. "This is exactly what happens when we let people like you wander into high-end venues. You don't even know how to sit at a proper table without creating a disaster." Hannah Brooks couldn't take it anymore. She grabbed a thick roll of paper towels from beneath the counter and stepped forward, her hands trembling violently. "Let me help you clean that up, ma'am," she whispered, her voice cracking with pure empathy. Before Hannah could lay a single sheet of paper down, Julian's hand shot out like a striking viper, ripping the paper towels away from her. "Did you completely lose your hearing, Hannah?" he roared, his voice echoing fiercely through the cavernous lobby. "I explicitly ordered you to step back. If you touch that counter, or if you offer so much as a single napkin to this trespasser, you are terminated on the spot. Leave the mess exactly where it is." Hannah froze, her breath catching sharply in her throat. She looked at Julian, then at Maya, her eyes swimming in hot, helpless tears. The raw injustice of the moment hung heavily in the air, thick and suffocating. She slowly retreated to the back corner of the counter, her shoulders shaking silently as she buried her face in her hands. Meanwhile, the affluent diners at the surrounding tables began to whisper loudly, their voices carrying across the quiet room. A woman in a diamond necklace adjusted her designer glasses, staring at Maya with an expression of pure disgust. "Unbelievable," she murmured to her companion. "Why does management even allow these people inside? They ruin the entire luxury atmosphere. I can barely enjoy my lunch with this kind of trash sitting right next to us." Her husband nodded thoroughly, adjusting his gold watch. "Exactly, executive lounges should remain completely exclusive. It's a shame the neighborhood is going downhill like this." Julian heard the whispers, and a sickening sense of triumph washed over his face. He leaned over the counter, glaring at Maya's calm demeanor. "You see that you are a public nuisance. My actual paying guests are completely disgusted by your presence." He pointed an aggressive finger at the exit doors. "I am telling you one last time, take your $15 of change and get out of my sight before things become incredibly ugly for you." Maya calmly folded her handkerchief and placed it back into her jacket. She looked at the counter where the spilled liquid was slowly drying. The price of the tea was $25. Maya said, her voice an oasis of absolute calm amidst the storm. "You have returned 15. You still owe me $10. I am not leaving this counter until my transaction is properly completed." Julian's face twisted into an ugly mask of pure rage. He couldn't believe this woman was refusing to break under his pressure. He turned his head toward Gavin Stone, who was still standing silently behind Maya's left shoulder. "Gavin, what are you standing there for like a useless statue? This woman is actively harassing my staff and disrupting our elite business. Get her out of my lobby right now." Gavin Stone hesitated, his jaw clenching tightly. He looked at Maya's peaceful, dignified posture, then looked at Julian's furious face. "Mr. Croft," Gavin said, his voice low and tight. "She's just standing here waiting for her correct change. Perhaps we should just open the drawer and give her the $10 to resolve the issue peacefully." Julian spun around, his eyes wide with disbelief. Are you lecturing me on how to run my establishment, Gavin? I don't pay you to think or give me operational advice. I pay you to remove unwanted trash from these premises. Do your job, or I will find a security guard who actually knows how to follow a direct order. The threat hung heavily in the air. Gavin swallowed hard, his hands clenching into tight fists at his sides. He took a heavy step closer to Maya, his shadow completely enveloping her. "Ma'am," he said, his voice shaking slightly with unspoken regret. "Please, don't make this any harder than it already is. You need to leave the building immediately." Maya turned her head slightly to look at Gavin. There was no anger in her eyes, only a deep, profound sadness. "An order you know is wrong doesn't stop being wrong just because a man with a gold name tag gave it to you, officer," she said softly. Gavin froze those words, striking him like a physical blow to the chest. He couldn't breathe, trapped between his livelihood and his basic human conscience. Julian laughed out loud, a harsh, mocking sound that filled the silent lounge. "Oh, save the pathetic philosophy for the streets, lady, you're done. You have exactly 10 seconds to walk out that door on your own feet." He reached across the counter, his eyes locked onto her faded brown bag. Before Maya could even respond, Julian's hand flew across the counter, aggressively snatching her grandmother's faded leather purse right off the marble surface. Maya's eyes narrowed, her calm demeanor sharpening into an icy focus. "Return my property immediately, Julian," she warned, her voice dropping into a dangerous, quiet register. Julian ignored her completely. He held the bag high into the air for the entire dining room to see. "Take your cheap purse and leave," he screamed, his voice bursting with absolute venom. With a brutal sweeping motion, he hurled the leather bag violently across the Sawn-H waiting area. The purse slammed hard against the distant marble floor, the old zipper splitting completely open under the intense force. The contents exploded everywhere across the pristine tiles. A cheap lipstick rolled into a corner, a ring of brass house keys clattered against the wall, and a crumpled blue leather folder slid across the floor, stopping right near a velvet chair leg. But the most devastating loss was a tiny faded photograph that had slipped from the inner pocket. It was a picture of Maya as a little girl sitting on the lap of her grandmother, the very woman who had saved every penny from her factory job to give Maya her start in life. The photograph drifted face up onto the polished stone. Julian marched out from behind the counter, his polished designer shoes clicking loudly as he approached the scattered items. He didn't even look down as his heavy heel came crashing directly down onto the small photograph. He intentionally twisted his foot, grinding the image into the cold, camthack floor, tearing the corner of the paper and leaving a dark, filthy smudge right over her grandmother's face. "Look at this pathetic garbage," Julian scoffed, looking down at the scattered items with immense amusement. "A regular collection of poverty. You're nothing but a thief casing this establishment, looking for an opportunity to steal from people who actually belong here." He reached to his belt, unclipped his corporate radio, and pressed the button, speaking loudly so every single guest in the room could hear his words. "All units, we have an emergency in the main lobby. A hostile black woman has entered the premises under the guise of buying a beverage. She is actively casing the venue, acting as a pickpocket, and she is carrying a highly dangerous weapon in her jacket. Send backup immediately to assist with a forced extraction." The false accusation landed like an absolute bombshell. The entire room fell completely silent. Nobody dared to breathe. Hannah Brooks let out a loud gasp from behind the counter, covering her mouth, as fresh tears streamed down her face. Gavin Stone stood completely paralyzed, his face turning pale as he realized Julian was intentionally trying to ruin this innocent woman's life by labeling her a dangerous criminal. At table 6, a young 23-year-old nursing student quietly slipped her phone out of her pocket. Angling it carefully behind her napkin, she pressed the record button. Her hands trembled with intense anger as she captured every single second of Julian's tyrannical behavior on camera. Maya stood perfectly still, looking down at the ruined photograph beneath Julian's shoe. For the first time all afternoon, a cold, unyielding fire burned deep within her eyes. She did not yell. She did not scream. She slowly reached into the inner pocket of her canvas jacket and pulled out her smartphone. She unlocked the screen, tapped it exactly 3 times, and held the phone to her ear. The entire room watched her in absolute silence. The wealthy diners, the trembling intern, the paralyzed security guard, and Julian himself all stared at her. The call connected almost instantly. Maya spoke exactly 4 words into the receiver, her voice completely even, steady, and terrifyingly calm. Victoria, San Horizon, now. Without waiting for a response, she immediately hung up the phone and placed it back into her pocket. Julian let out another loud, arrogant sneer, shaking his head dismissively. "Oh, look at you, acting like you're on a first-name basis with someone important. Who did you just call your local social worker, your bail bondsman?" He crossed his arms, stepping closer to her. "Let me tell you something, lady. I have managed this floor for 8 consecutive years. I am personal friends with the highest district executives in this city. You can call whoever you want, but absolutely nobody is going to take the word of a broke vagrant over mine. You have exactly 30 seconds before the real police arrive to drag you out of here in handcuffs." Maya didn't say a single word in response. She walked over to the scattered contents of her bag, entirely ignoring Julian's presence. She bypassed the keys and the lipstick, her eyes focused entirely on the crumpled blue folder resting against the velvet chair. She reached down, picked it up, and shook the dust from it. Then she walked over to a nearby vacant chair, pulled it out, and sat down quietly. "I will wait," Maya said, simply folding her hands over the blue folder. Julian's face went entirely red, his fists clenching so tightly that his knuckles turned white. "Fine. You want to play the stubborn game, Gavin? Pull her out of that chair right now." But before Gavin could even make a move, a sudden sharp screech of tires echoed from the outdoor driveway. The heavy glass entrance doors of the Grand Horizon didn't just open, they swung back with tremendous force, rattling against their brass frames. The sharp, rapid click of expensive high heels echoed violently against the marble floor, cutting through the heavy silence of the room like gunfire. Victoria Ashford, the multimillionaire chief executive officer of Ashford Realty Group, the current mega-corporation that owned the entire high-rise complex Lao Vausan. She was a woman in her late 50s, wearing a flawless gray designer suit, her hair pulled back tightly and her face completely covered in a cold sweat. She was breathing heavily, her eyes wide with a frantic panic as she scanned the room. Julian Croft's eyes lit up with instant recognition. He immediately smoothed his silk tie, adjusted his gold name tag, and plastered his most professional, charming managerial smile across his face. He knew Victoria well. She was the absolute apex of power in his professional world, visiting the flagship location only once a quarter to review financial performance. Julian fully believed that his brilliant corporate networking was about to pay off. He assumed she happened to be in the building and had heard about the dangerous trespasser in the SAN area. Julian stepped forward eagerly, cutting off her path. "Ms. Ashford, thank God you are here," he exclaimed, his voice filled with pride and obsequious groveling. "I am so incredibly sorry you have to witness this disaster. I have everything completely under control, though. A hostile, unstable black woman managed to sneak past our security perimeter. She's been harassing my staff, stealing from the register, and she even has a hidden weapon. I've already contacted the authorities to have her removed, so..." Victoria Ashford didn't even slow down. She didn't look at Julian. She didn't acknowledge his voice. With a brutal physical shove, she hit Julian's shoulder, slamming him completely out of her path. Julian stumbled backward, his mouth hanging open in absolute shock as he lost his balance and nearly fell over the grand counter. Victoria's eyes were locked entirely on the woman sitting quietly in the simple velvet chair near the back wall. The frantic, aggressive expression on the CEO's face instantly melted into something else, something that looked a whole lot like absolute terror. It was the crushing, paralyzing fear of a corporate executive who realized her entire empire was on the verge of collapsing because of a massive mistake under her watch. Before a single person in the room could utter a sound, Victoria Ashford rushed over to Maya Montgomery. Her expensive knees hit the cold marble floor with a loud thud. She quay sup shuang right beside Maya's dusty work boots, her hands trembling uncontrollably as she looked up at the woman in the canvas jacket. "Ms. Montgomery! Oh my God, please, I am so deeply sorry!" Victoria gasped, her voice shaking so violently she could barely form the syllables. "I came the exact second I received your call. Please tell me you are all right. I am completely horrified by this. Please let us fix this immediately." Ms. Montgomery. The name floated across the silent luxury dining room like heavy smoke. Julian Croft froze completely, his entire body turning rigid as his breath caught sharply in his throat. The plastic smile on his face was completely shattered, his jaw dropping so low it looked unhinged. Behind the marble counter, Hannah Brooks stopped moving entirely. Her hand, which had been holding a wet cloth against the steel espresso machine, went completely still. Her eyes widened to the size of saucers. Gavin Stone, the security guard, took a full, panicked step backward, his face draining of all color until he went pale as a ghost. The wealthy couple at table 4 looked at each other in utter confusion, the woman's fork slipping from her hand and clattering loudly against her porcelain plate. The older man with the gold watch slowly lowered his newspaper, his eyes fixed on the site of the most powerful real estate CEO in Chicago, kneeling on the floor before a woman dressed like a construction worker. "Ms. Ashford!" Julian's voice cracked violently on the second syllable, sounding thin and terrified. Who exactly is this person? There must be some sort of massive misunderstanding. She doesn't have a reservation, and her clothes... Victoria Ashford spun around on her knees, her face contorting into an expression of pure, unadulterated fury that could have cut straight through solid steel. She stood up slowly, her eyes glaring at Julian with absolute hatred. "Shut your pathetic mouth, Julian!" Victoria screamed, her voice shaking the high glass windows. "This is Maya Montgomery. She is the founder, the sole owner, and the chief executive officer of Montgomery Holdings." She paused for a long, agonizing beat, letting every single syllable settle heavily into every dark corner of the crowded room. "She is the brand new owner of this entire high-rise building of this lounge, and of every single piece of commercial real estate this corporation owns across the state. The $80 million acquisition contract was officially finalized and closed exactly 3 days ago. She is your boss, Julian. She owns everything you see." The room didn't just go quiet. It went completely, absolutely dead. The automated jazz music seemed to fade away into nothingness. The distant clatter of the kitchen completely vanished. The only audible sound in the entire 5-star establishment was the slow, rhythmic dripping of the spilled tea from the edge of the marble counter hitting the floor with a steady, haunting echo. Julian Croft looked at Maya Montgomery. He looked at the faded canvas jacket. He looked at the dusty work boots. He looked at the ruined photograph under his own shoe. The realization crashed into his soul like a tidal wave. He had just seen Nook falsely accused and thrown the property of the $80 million billionaire who owned his entire life. The heavy silence pressing down upon the grand room felt physically suffocating, a heavy weight that made it impossible for Julian Croft to draw a full breath. Maya Montgomery rose slowly from her chair, her movements unhurried, graceful, and projecting an immense, undeniable authority that dwarfed everyone else in the room. In her hands, she held the crumpled blue folder that Julian had thrown onto the wet floor. With slow, painful deliberation, she stepped across the marble tiles, her boots stopping just inches away from Julian's polished designer shoes. Without breaking eye contact, she unfolded the heavy document, smoothing out the creased pages directly on top of the marble counter, right over the sticky, dried pool of spilled liquid. The bold, crisp, black letterhead of Montgomery Holdings stared back at Julian's failing vision. Below it, the legal text detailed the comprehensive asset transfer schedules, corporate entity disclosures, and property management titles for 35 major venues. At the absolute bottom of the final page, resting in clean, authoritative blue ink, was the unmistakable signature of Maya Montgomery. I officially closed on this flagship property on Tuesday afternoon, Maya said, her voice remaining perfectly level, calm, and entirely devoid of any chaotic anger. An $80 million purchase to acquire a network of venues where I believed hospitality was a sacred bond. I explicitly chose to come here today looking like an ordinary working person because I wanted to see exactly how my staff treats a human being who appears to have absolutely no social leverage or corporate power. I wanted to witness the raw truth that an executive spreadsheet could never show me. She looked down at the floor, her eyes tracing the scattered keys, the cheap lipstick, and finally stopping on the ruined photograph that was still firmly pinned beneath Julian's trembling heel. And now, because of your arrogance, Julian, I have seen the absolute truth. I know exactly what kind of monster has been running my establishment. Julian's face drained of color instantly. The bright red flush of anger that had consumed his face moments ago vanished, replaced by a sickly, paper-white pallor. His mouth opened wide, his lips moving frantically, like a fish gasping for water, but absolutely no sound came out of his throat. His knees began to buckle beneath his weight, his hands hanging completely limp at his sides, as his manicured fingers twitched with a deep primal panic. The absolute illusion of his power had been permanently shattered in front of his elite guests. Victoria Ashford stepped closer to the trembling manager, her eyes flashing with a dangerous, career-ending rage. "Did you intentionally throw this woman's private property onto the floor, Julian?" she asked, her voice dropping into a low, precise whisper that shook the air. "Did you falsely accuse the corporate owner of this entire enterprise of carrying a dangerous weapon over our official security radio frequency?" Julian's eyes darted frantically around the room, desperately looking for a single ally, an exit route, or anyone who might step forward to defend his actions. But he found absolutely nothing but cold, judging stares. The affluent couple at table 4, who had previously cheered his exclusive behavior, were now staring intently down at their napkins, trying to blend into the furniture. The wealthy woman with the diamond necklace had turned her head away entirely, hiding behind her designer purse. At table 6, the young nursing student was still holding her phone steady, recording every single second of Gau's public humiliation. I didn't know," Julian finally stammered, his voice pitching high into a pathetic, desperate squeak. "Ms. Montgomery, please. It was an honest operational misunderstanding. I truly thought you were an unstable vagrant who had slipped past the SANH security gates to disrupt our business. If I had known who you actually were, I never would have, And that is the core of your sickness, Julian," Maya interrupted him, her voice cutting through his frantic rambling like a razor-sharp blade. "If you had known who I was, you would have smiled, called me ma'am, pulled out my chair, and offered me the finest vintage champagne on the house. And then the very next black woman who walked through those luxury doors, wearing a simple canvas jacket, you would have thrown her purse onto the floor and called her a thief instead." Julian flinched hard, stepping backward, as if her calm words were physical blows crashing into his chest. He looked up at her, his eyes glassy with unshed tears of pure terror. "You are not remotely sorry for the vile actions you committed today." Maya whispered, her dark eyes locking onto his soul. "You are simply terrified that the person you chose to humiliate had the absolute power to destroy you." Victoria Ashford didn't wait for Julian to form another pathetic excuse. She pulled her corporate smartphone from her blazer pocket, her fingers flying across the screen as she dialed the head of Human Resources and Legal Counsel. "Effective immediately, Julian Croft is terminated for cause from his position as General Manager of the Grand Horizon," she commanded into the line, her voice echoing clearly across the frozen room. "Block his corporate accounts, cancel his health benefits, and flag his permanent record for gross misconduct, racial discrimination, and filing a false emergency security report." She hung up the phone with a sharp click, turning her glaring eyes back to the ruined manager. "Surrender your corporate keys, your building access badge, and your managerial credentials right now, Julian. You are permanently banned from entering this property or any property associated with Ashford and Montgomery Holdings for the rest of your natural life." Julian's hands shook violently as he reached toward his belt. He unclipped the massive ring of master keys, keys to the front entrance, the executive vaults, the liquor cages, and the private lounges, and placed them onto the marble counter with a hollow metallic clank that sounded like a funeral knell. Next, his trembling fingers reached for his gold-plated name tag. He unpinned it from his chest, staring at the words "Julian Croft, General Manager," for one last time before dropping it next to the keys. Hannah Brooks watched the entire process from the back corner of the counter. She didn't blink. She didn't look away. For 2 long years, she had endured Julian's cruel remarks, his constant bullying, and his toxic management. Watching that gold badge hit the counter brought a profound sense of relief that made her chest expand with a clean, deep breath. "Gavin!" Victoria Ashford called out, turning to the security guard, who was still standing rigidly behind Maya. "Please escort Mr. Croft out of this building and ensure he is off the premises immediately. If he hesitates for a single second, contact the real authorities and have him arrested for criminal trespass." Gavin Stone stepped forward, his stone-cold face showing absolutely no sympathy for his former boss. The very security guard Julian had ordered to commit a terrible injustice was now the man escorting him out in absolute disgrace. Gavin gripped Julian's elbow firmly, turning him toward the exit. Julian looked at Gavin, desperately searching for a shred of camaraderie from a man he had shared hundreds of shifts with. But Gavin kept his eyes locked straight ahead, refusing to acknowledge him. As they walked toward the doors, the dining room remained dead silent, the only sound being the shuffling of Julian's feet as his career crumbled into dust. Maya Montgomery watched them leave, then turned her attention back to Gavin Stone when he returned to the SANH a minute later. The guard stood with his head lowered, his shoulders slouched under the weight of his profound shame. "Gavin," Maya said softly, causing the big man to look up with red, bloodshot eyes. "When Julian ordered you to eject me, you hesitated. I saw the conflict in your face. A part of your soul knew that what he was demanding was fundamentally wrong." Gavin swallowed hard, a muscle jumping violently near his jaw. "Yes, ma'am. I knew it was wrong. I am so deeply sorry. I was terrified of losing my job. I have a family to feed." "An order you know is morally corrupt doesn't stop being corrupt just because it comes from a man with a superior title, Gavin," Maya said, her voice filled with an honest, grounding empathy. "I am not going to terminate your employment today because I believe you possess a conscience. But I need you to sit with that shame. I need you to remember exactly how terrible it felt to walk toward an innocent person with the intent to harm them simply because you were told to do so. Let that feeling ensure you never make that choice again. Gavin nodded slowly, a single tear escaping his eye. Thank you, Ms. Montgomery. I will never forget it. I swear it. Maya then turned around, looking down at the scattered items on the marble floor. She bypassed Victoria, who immediately reached down to help. No, Victoria. I've got it, Maya said quietly. She knelt down on the cold marble, her 56-year-old knees popping slightly in the quiet room. With total grace and humility, she began to gather her scattered keys and her cheap lipstick, placing them back into her grandmother's bag. Finally, she reached for the ruined photograph. She gently picked up the torn paper, running her thumb across the dark smudge Julian's shoe had left over her grandmother's face. She didn't look angry. She looked deeply resolved. She stood up, placing the photograph safely into her inner jacket pocket. She walked over to the counter, where Hannah Brooks was standing, with her hands clasped tightly together. Maya reached into her pocket, pulled out the $15 of incorrect change Julian had given her, and dropped the bills directly into the glass tip jar on the counter. Thank you for the tea, Hannah, Maya said, a warm, genuine smile returning to her face. Your kindness today was the only thing in this room that possessed true luxury. She turned to Victoria Ashford. Effective immediately, Hannah Brooks is appointed as the new Executive Guest Relations Director of the Grand Horizon, with a full corporate salary and comprehensive tuition assistance. I want someone running this floor who understands that human dignity is the ultimate standard of service. The digital world moves with a terrifying, unyielding speed, and before Julian Croft's luxury sports car had even cleared the perimeter of the Buckhead parking lot, his professional life was already completely over. The 23-year-old nursing student at Table 6 had uploaded her unedited, raw 3-minute and 41-second video recording to her social media platforms. She didn't include a long, complex description or an elaborate caption. She simply attached 4 simple, devastating words. This happened in Buckhead. By midnight that Tuesday evening, the footage had amassed over 200,000 views. By the time the sun rose on Wednesday morning, that number had exploded into a staggering 4 million. The comment sections across the internet became a roaring ocean of righteous anger. Activists, local news stations, and everyday citizens tagged the corporate accounts of Ashford Realty Group, demanding immediate answers. Short-looped clips of Julian ripping the faded purse from Maya's hands and shouting, "Take your cheap purse and leave," spread across every platform like wildfire, followed closely by the sickening sound of his designer heel grinding her family photograph into the dirt. By Wednesday afternoon, a prominent investigative journalist named Megan Taylor broke the full story on the local television affiliate. Megan was a relentless reporter who didn't just look at the viral video. She began to dig deeply into county employment archives, state labor board public records, and internal corporate compliance files. What she uncovered proved that the incident with Maya Montgomery was far from an isolated event. Over the past 4 years, 3 separate formal discrimination complaints had been filed against Julian Croft by affluent black patrons and minority delivery drivers. All 3 complaints had been thoroughly documented with explicit dates, eyewitness statements, and detailed incident reports. Yet absolutely none of them had ever reached the executive board. Megan Taylor discovered that the district operations supervisor, a powerful corporate executive named Preston Caldwell, was a close personal friend of Julian. They played golf together on weekends, attended the same exclusive country club, and their families vacationed together. Whenever a serious complaint regarding Julian's racist or elitist behavior landed on Preston's desk, he quietly deleted the tracking files from the corporate servers to protect his friend's career. Megan displayed the recovered digital timestamps directly on live television, including a private email Preston had sent to Julian after the second complaint was filed, which simply read, "Handled. don't worry about it. 3 simple words that erased a human being's dignity. The public backlash was insurmountable. Montgomery Holdings released an official statement written directly by Maya herself within hours of the broadcast. What occurred at the Grand Horizon was not a temporary failure of one manager. It was the predictable result of a corrupt corporate system that allowed human abuse to be hidden and accountability to be completely avoided. That system ends permanently today. Preston Caldwell was immediately terminated without a single penny of severance and placed under a federal civil rights investigation alongside Julian. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission opened a sweeping audit into the firm's historical practices. The 3 original victims, who had been ignored for years, were contacted directly by Maya's personal legal team, receiving massive financial settlements and profound written apologies that validated their experiences. The Grand Horizon closed its doors completely for 2 weeks. When it finally reopened, the entire operational framework had been rebuilt from the ground up. Maya implemented a strict, independent third-party compliance hotline that bypassed local management entirely alongside mandatory intensive empathy and de-escalation training programs facilitated by external civil rights organizations. Exactly 6 weeks after that fateful afternoon, Maya Montgomery pulled her 10-year-old Honda Civic back into the parking lot of the Grand Horizon. The summer sun was cutting low through the pristine trees, painting the limestone facade in a deep, warm gold. The boxwood hedges were perfectly trimmed, and the grand brass sign by the door gleamed beautifully under the afternoon light. She stepped out of the vehicle, wearing the exact same faded canvas jacket, dusty work boots, and carrying her grandmother's creased brown leather purse, now beautifully repaired, with a pristine new brass zipper. She pushed through the heavy glass doors. A small, welcoming silver bell chimed softly above her head, a new touch designed to make every visitor feel acknowledged. The rich aroma of rosemary and fresh pastries hit her instantly, but the energy of the room was completely transformed. The Sawn-H waiting area was bustling with a diverse crowd of patrons, a young minority couple enjoying a dessert by the window, a group of college students studying with their laptops, and an older man enjoying a cup of coffee. There was a warmth in the air that had been completely absent 6 weeks ago. The room felt safe, inclusive, and genuinely alive. Behind the grand marble counter stood Hannah Brooks, dressed in a flawless executive blazer, her posture confident, proud, and radiating an effortless leadership. She looked up, her eyes locking onto Maya, and a brilliant, beautiful smile spread across her face. "Good afternoon, Ms. Montgomery," Hannah said, her voice rich with a profound respect. "Your standard table is completely ready for you, and I've already prepared a fresh hot pot of our premium chamomile tea." Maya walked over to the counter, setting her bag down gently. "How is the new team doing, Hannah?" she asked softly. Hannah leaned forward, her eyes bright. "Incredible, ma'am. The new reporting hotline has completely changed the culture. The kitchen staff and the servers finally feel like their voices actually matter. People don't walk in here looking at labels anymore. They just see human beings." Maya nodded thoroughly, taking a slow, comforting sip of her tea. It was the exact same brew from 6 weeks ago, but sitting here in a room built on respect, it tasted infinitely better. She finished her beverage, placed a crisp $50 bill onto the counter, and gave Hannah a warm wink. "Keep the change for the staff fund, Director Brooks." As Maya walked back out toward the entrance, she paused at the doorway. Bolted firmly into the limestone wall at eye level was a beautiful, simple brass plaque with raised black lettering. Maya ran her thumb gently across the text, feeling the weight of the words she had personally chosen. "Every guest who crosses this threshold deserves absolute dignity. If you experience or witness anything less, call this direct number," She smiled under the brim of her cap, stepped out into the warm golden sunlight of Chicago, and drove away into a brighter future. True luxury can never be bought with a designer label, an expensive watch, or an $80 million bank account. Human dignity is an absolute birthright, not an exclusive privilege reserved for the wealthy. When we choose to judge a person based entirely on their outward appearance or the color of their skin, we reveal nothing about their character, but we reveal absolutely everything about our own shallow ignorance. If this story touched your heart and reminded you of the true value of human respect, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Drop a comment below with your thoughts on Julian's fate, and let me know if you caught that mysterious transformation from chamomile tea to black coffee in the middle of the chaos. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our upcoming cinematic stories. Thank you for watching, and remember to always stand up for what is right.